Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Driving Production. In this episode, we're going to be talking about bushings and lowering springs.
I'm JP, and here I do car reviews, car mods install, mod reviews, and pretty much anything in between. So if you like that kind of content, consider subscribing and joining the community. This is Driving Production.
So after driving all winter with the Mazda 3 and hitting many potholes with the beautiful roads of Ottawa, my ball joints started to get loose on my front control arms on the Mazda 3. And when I got it checked out, I was recommended to change the bushings too. So while I was at it, I decided to upgrade to some polyurethane bushings since I was going to change the bushings and the ball joint at the same time. And that's what brought me to getting some Siberian bushings. So from what I've seen, they are a Russian or Siberian company. They've been in business, I think, for about 15-20 years or so, from what it mentions on their website. And what kind of got me interested in them is they're a little bit cheaper. So it'll be interesting to see if they last as long. But they opened a branch in Canada, so I was saving on some shipping and duty fees, and it was all the same currency. So compared to some bushings like PowerFlex, with the currency exchange and the duties, it would have been quite a bit more expensive, and on top of that, it was a more expensive product. So it'll be interesting to see how good these bushings perform. From what they mention on the package, they've basically reproduced the OEM design, but just with polyurethane. The rides in the Mazdas should still be comfortable, but a little firmer and a little bit more responsive. And that's what I'm going for with the Mazda 3 as a daily driver. These are all the bushings I got. There is a promotion on the website that mentions if you order over a certain amount, you get free shipping. So there are some bushings that I got, like this one for the rear, that I know it tends to fail on the Mazda 3, that I won't be installing right away, but in the future I'll be installing that. I also got some new sway bar bushing for the size of the Mazda Speed ones, so I can replace those in the rear, and when I decide to install the front ones, I'll be able to do so too. So if we go right into the bushings, this is the front. The bigger one is the front lower control arm bushing. Just looking at it, it looks pretty, the quality looks pretty good. It's a full bushing, as you can see. And if I compare it to the OEM one, from what I can see, I think there's some holes that go through the OEM bushing. So that'll be a little bit stiffer for sure. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more steering response out of this. From what I can see, this is galvanized steel. Hopefully it won't rust, or very little. I think it would have been a nice touch if these would have been painted or even powder coated, or even had an option on the website to do so. So moving on, we have the other bushing for the control arm. Looking at it, it looks very, very similar to the current bushing. So you can see where they got really the OEM design. There is some grease that comes with it, so I'm assuming you grease it up all around, press fit the bushing. So overall, I think the quality seems pretty decent compared to the price. I would say for everything, it was probably around half the price of what the PowerFlex was going for. So after just looking at the bushing and comparing them to the OEM bushing on the control arm, the used control arms I got, I'm looking forward to having them installed, to being able to see how they feel and how they handle. Honestly, the quality looks pretty good. I'm pretty impressed for the price of everything. It is just a OEM design, but still, it is polyurethane, so it should be a little bit stiffer, and we should get a little bit more response from the steering wheel. So apart from that, that's pretty much it for the before the install. Now we'll go to how they feel after they're installed. So the way I'm going to do the in-car review for the springs and the Siberian bushing, I'm just going to be talking about the Eibach lowering springs first by themselves and how they affected the car. And then I'm going to go ahead and talk about the Siberian bushings, how they affected the car, the characteristics themselves, and how it goes together at the end. So that way, if you just want to hear the in-car review about the Siberian bushings, you can skip ahead to that section of the video. All right, so I gotta say I'm pretty excited for this in-car review. It's been a little while since I did an in-car review about something I've done on the car, so I'm pretty excited for that. There's also some aspects for the lowering springs, for example, that I was expecting, and other things that I think came out of it and I wasn't expecting, but it actually benefited the car in different ways.
The lowering springs I've installed are from the brand Eibach from the Sportline series. They lower the car 2.2 inches in the front and 2 inches in the back. They are lower than the Eibach Pro Kit series.
So the reason someone might want to install lowering spring could be for a lot of different reasons. Some people do it for style, some people do it for handling, better response. And I'd say I probably did it for a combination of those things. I think the car looks way better, lower to the ground, less wheel gap, and also I was looking forward to some handling benefits too.
I personally think it's an ideal height for a daily driver. I don't think it's too low. I haven't scraped either going over speed bumps nor parking lot entrances.
So if we talk about the handling of the car definitely feels way flatter, even though there is still a little bit of body roll because they are progressive spring rates. They're going to stay softer, and then when you really turn in or push the car, they're going to stiffen up more.
Talking about spring rates, I thought it'd be interesting to go over a few numbers. The OEM spring rate in the front is 131 pounds per inch, while the Sportline rates go from 126 to 186 to 297 pounds per inch. And for the rear, the OEM rate is 137 pounds per inch, while the Eibach rates go from 126 to 194 to 251 pounds per inch.
So if you've seen my in-car review for the rear sway bar, I did mention that the steering wheel felt a little bit numb, like it felt like looser went with the rear sway bar, making the rear end a lot tighter. But I feel like with the springs, it somewhat fixed that issue. The steering wheel does feel quite a bit sharper, and with the car handling flatter, it does feel like the car's more responsive. Now, I still don't get a tremendous amount of feedback through the steering wheel with the springs.
On the other hand, they do make you feel more connected to the road with the firmer suspension.
So if we now talk about the ride quality of how the car actually handles and how is it to drive every day, right? So the ride quality is definitely stiffer. You can definitely feel that the ride is a little bit harsher, but it's not a crazy amount. When you do go over some potholes or some really big bumps at higher speed, it does affect the ride quality a little bit. The 18-inch with the lower profile do affect the ride quality in that aspect too. So if you were to run thicker profile, like maybe on 17 or even 16-inch tire, 16-inch wheels, it would probably make the ride quality more comfortable, but I wouldn't say that it's not comfortable even though I have 18-inch wheels. So like I was mentioning, if you hit a big bump or a big pothole, you do feel it in the car. If that happens, you will see, I definitely saw a little bit of bounce from the car afterwards. It might be that the struts are still fairly old on the car and they're starting to be worn out too. So that could be a possibility since the car has 184,000 kilometers on it. So could be one of the reasons, but it's just something to note too.
The change that surprised me the most was actually related to the brakes. The car nosedive way less when braking, making the brake pedal feel much more responsive.
But overall, I gotta say I'm really happy with the install. I think the car handles really nicely. Combined with the rear sway bar, the car just dives into corners like it's no problem, and I really feel like I'm almost where I really want the steering wheel. It's definitely sharper in the turn-ins. I think really what I'd like more from the steering wheel is a little bit more response. And that kind of brings me to one of the reasons why I did the Siberian bushings, or the polyurethane bushings that I installed on the car.
From the factory, like many economy cars, the steering is very light with a minimum of feedback. When I installed my summer wheels earlier this season, I saw a significant difference with the lower profile 18-inch wheels. Now paired with the Siberian bushings, it definitely improved the steering feedback.
And they're definitely stiffer. Like if I go in a corner here, I have more feedback from the steering wheel for sure. The front end does feel heavier at lower speeds. I find if you go at highway speeds, it does feel you have a little bit more heaviness compared to the OEM for sure. But you definitely see the biggest difference either in parking lots or really at lower speeds corner. It's very subtle, I find, the way you get more response from the steering wheel with the bushings. It's almost something you have to look for it, because if you're not looking for it, you might not necessarily feel the difference. I remember when I had an E46 years ago, and I did some PowerFlex bushings on the car, and I felt like those bushing made a night and day difference. Maybe it was because the bushing might have been worn out more on the BMW at that time, that it made a bigger difference. I'm not sure, but overall there is still a bit more steering response and steering feedback that came out of the bushings. Now with the springs and the bushings install, I'm really happy because the whole front end feels very tight. It feels very firm and solid. With the bushings, you can feel that everything's tight, especially coming back that the ball joint needed to be replaced. So it did feel like the front end had a little bit of loose in it. Now with the combination of those two, it feels very nice and very sharp on the steering wheel. So if I look at the combination of both the springs and the control arm bushings, I gotta say it makes for a very nice combination. The car overall, like I mentioned, it feels sharper. The steering wheel has a little bit more response, and the handling is just way more dialed in. With the combination of the rear sway bar on top of that, in the corners the car just feels very sharp on turn-in. It doesn't feel like it wants to understeer at all, and it doesn't feel like it wants to snap, and the rear end just wants to snap either. When I go into corner and I start pushing the car, it just feels like it wants to go more and more without really understeering or oversteering either. So it's a very, very flat car. It handles very neutrally. But overall, I'm really happy with how both turned out. I would definitely recommend this mod if you're considering it. I think it's definitely worth it, especially for the cost of it. Obviously, I think I'd like a little bit more steering response from my steering wheel, especially at higher speed, like higher corner, like these ones that I'm doing right here. But I think that's going to be something we'll be able to cover in a future episode. As for this in-car review for the Eibach spring and the Siberian bushing, that's pretty much it for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.